Get some water. We are going live now, Facebook. Wait till some people tune in here. Check 1, 2. Is that audio coming in? Let's see. Audio is coming in. Seems to be at a good volume. All right. Let's wait till some people tune on in. YouTube, hello, hello. There's a crazy thunderstorm outside in case you guys see any lightning, or in case the power goes out and I disappear, that's why. Actually, I'll show you the outside view. Yeah, it is pouring. It's almost like a tropical storm or something. It's pretty intense. All right, people are tuning in. I'm just going to do a quick note. Let us know where you're listening from. Say hello in the comments, of course. I've got my chat window open over there.
All dressed up, nowhere to go. TV's on, no one's home. Look me up, I'm not there. Leave a message, show you care. Meal for two.
All right, all right.
Tea for one.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another Wednesday session breakdown. I'm Paul from Savoir Adore. Thanks for joining us. I see some of you already tuning in from Facebook and YouTube and Twitch. Hello, everybody. Let us know where you're listening from. As always, let me know if you have any questions about the session or about anything, to be honest. And again, if I disappear, it's because there's a crazy thunderstorm outside and we probably might lose power. So hopefully that doesn't happen. Fingers crossed. So today we're going to do something a little different. We are going to talk about our remix of Minke's Gold Angel, which you can see I was just playing a little clip of the final product on Spotify. This song has been pretty amazing, and it's actually it was one of our top songs on Spotify for about a year and a half. And for those that don't know, I do remixes quite frequently, and a few of them have done pretty well. It's just something, through doing production, through doing the band, and especially, remix culture across the board it's just a lot, there's just a lot more of it than there was 10 years ago. So if you're ever interested, I'll actually post this later, but we have a whole playlist of all the remixes we've done. We've done it for awesome bands like Japanese Wallpaper, Now Now, Ex Ambassadors, Great Good Fine OK, Minke, and a lot of others. So I thought it was I thought it'd be fun to talk about this one in particular because it's reached a lot of people. So yeah, I'm gonna dive in. But yeah, you just heard a little clip of the original. I kind of want to break down how remixes work in general because, it's different for everyone. And also I think a lot of people might just think remixing is only happening at like the highest level with a big dance like David Guetta, Calvin Harris level stuff. But the truth is, oh, hi, Rosie. Just saying hello to people. Got my chat window open again. If you have any questions, just let me know. There's a lot of remixing going on in indie dance music as well, indie pop, alt rock. It's really across the board. And it's a cool way of getting, you know, a song across to multiple different audiences and different communities, different genres even. So the funny thing with this one in particular, you know, these requests usually come through management, through different record labels, stuff like that. For Minke, we actually have the same manager. And on top of it, years and years ago, back in 2014, I did a little bit of work on the original production of this song. So I already knew the song, which was really cool. So I kind of knew it already inside and out. But in general, you know, I agreed to do the remix, and I was sent stems for the song, which is basically like all the instruments separated. And so for this song, I thought it'd be fun to, you know, kind of show you the whole process of doing a remix, especially for a song like this. I ended up getting stems, and as you know, you can see here, these are really nicely organized. Sometimes you ask for stems and you get like 150 different instruments, then you spend half a day like organizing it all, and it's a headache. But usually, you know, with a well-mixed, well-produced song, it's organized like this. And it's basically every element separated, which as a music nerd, it's also just fun to sort of see the production. And I've actually learned a lot listening to stems of other producers and stuff like that. So this one was particularly interesting. But yeah, let me just show you a little bit of the original, because it's much more of like a kind of an indie rock, soul, down-tempo. You know, it's just a really beautiful song. So I'll just play a little bit of that so you guys can hear. This is the original Gold Angel.
Oh, dressed up, nowhere to go. TV's on, no one's home. Look me up, I'm not there. Leave a message, show you care.
I'll play a little more so it gets through one chorus.
Meal for two, eat for one. This place of worship has come undone. Shadow frame upon the wall, no photograph to look out for. I'll be your gold angel if you want me. I'll be your gold angel, baby, you want me.
So yeah, that's... See, there's some drums come in, but overall it's a pretty chill song, but it's a very good song. And honestly, you know, these are I wouldn't say the easiest to remix, but what's nice about it is that when the production is pretty simple and the song is really strong and Leah's vocal is just incredible, you have so much good stuff to work with, you know? So I think the remixes always end up really good for songs like this, and there's sort of, you know, alternatively though, there's a lot of options, you know, because since the production is sort of open-ended, it's really, you know, this production is beautiful, but it's very understated, very much serves the song, so that Leah's vocal and the guitar part are what really shine. So usually when I start a remix, I'll listen to the song, the original, once, because I've found in the past if I listen to the original too many times, I start then getting in my head about like honoring the original or overthinking it, at least in some ways. So for me, I'd rather just listen to the original, then check out the stems, and then I kind of end up finding one or two elements that to me really grab the ear. You know, something that's very, very interesting if there's a guitar part or a vocal stem or even a whole bounce. And then from there, usually step two is, okay, what is the feel of this remix? Because again, for anyone who's familiar with our music, you know, we're an indie rock band that leans a little bit electronic, a little bit dance, but nothing too intense. You know, we're not doing like, you know, David Guetta drumming like super heavy duty big room dance music or anything like that. So usually our remixes are more in the indie dance category, and you know, I've always loved bands like Classics, the remixers. You know, their remixes are so great because they live in that world. Poolside, Jean Tonique is someone who's new that I really love. But you know, remixes that are not necessarily like super heavy dance floor remixes. I think it's cool to reimagine these songs in a more like indie dance setting. So for this one, I kind of knew that I wanted to keep it down tempo. This is you know, the original was 96 BPM, which is sort of like lower mid tempo. not super high energy, fast. For reference, usually like EDM house big stuff is like 125 to 130 BPM. New disco and indie dance will be more in the 110s. So this is much more like slower, chill. So immediately I was kind of like, I want to do, a remix that you would hear by the pool somewhere at like a boutique hotel or something. And I think that's important. I think it's, for me at least, and this is with Savoir Adore songs and with remixes, I come up with a concept first. I want to know like the environment. Wow, this thunderstorm is crazy. It is like literally, look at this. It's like the heaviest rain. I don't even know if you can hear it, but anyway, again, hope we don't lose power because this is crazy. The rain is almost louder than my voice. But yeah, coming up with a concept, where it wants to be listened to, and a style, like the sort of vibe that you want to give up. I think coming up with an aesthetic first is really important, because otherwise you're just going to start throwing drums and sounds at something without actually knowing what you want. So for me, the first thing that happened was I also had the entire song bounced, and I'd fell in love. Here, I'm just going to open this up. This is the whole session, as you can see. And this one will be good because obviously remixes I mix, so we can talk more about details of the mixing process as well. I fell in love with this sample, which is actually like an end. It's the end. It's the ending, I think, of the chorus. Check it out.
Baby, you want me?
Yeah, it's basically the very ending of the song, and I just thought there was some really cool material going on. I ended up filtering it, and I was like, that's such a cool loop. It sort of has like this old vinyl warped kind of thing with those two chord changes in there. I just thought that was so cool, and that actually ended up inspiring this intro. And from there, I knew I wanted to keep it. I originally worked at the original tempo, which was 96 BPM. Later on, I bumped it up a little bit, which, just helped to push the track a little bit. But it wasn't that significant in terms of the overall direction of the remix. So I started with that, and I knew that I kind of wanted to sidechain a little bit. And, again, with remixes, kick drums are so important. Like, you kind of can't overstate that enough. I had been working a little bit with this awesome plugin called Big Kick, which allows you to basically craft kick drum sounds almost as if they're a synthesizer. But it also uses, as you can see here, a bass sample. So you have a little bit of that sample in there as well. And I settled on this kick sample. It has a really nice, I'm sure if you're on headphones, you can hear this nice pillow. You want a kick drum, to have that sort of information. This one actually had, as you can see, it had almost too much low-end information. Good question, Jordan. How much of SA do you inject into a remix versus remaining faithful to an original track? I would say it's about 50-50, I think in Savoir Adore, I have certain tendencies, syncopated bass lines, things with a little bit of like a disco bounce. That's a signature move for like songs like Dreamers or Beating Hearts. So I think I tend to put that stuff into the remix almost. It's almost like subconscious. Like that's my production choice always. But then, I want to honor especially the original song, especially the strongest parts of that song, like any melodic hooks, any instrumental hooks. It's fun to play with that. So it's really 50-50, and then there's almost this other part of me that's like, okay, I'm also a producer outside of Savoir Adore, outside of this other band too. What would I do if someone presented this song to me? What would I want it to sound like? And that's sort of like a totally new journey, a new challenge. And I just think it's really fun. So I kind of try to remember that. And that's really what ended up happening with this remix, especially, which is why I'm particularly proud of it, because I think it created something new that could live on its own. It doesn't just feel like a remix. So yeah, once I had that sample, this kick drum sound came together really easily. And it's a very pure electronic one. So I knew that once more beat came in, I like to layer usually one clean, pure electronic with an acoustic. This is a acoustic kick drum sample that I made. It's actually something, our working on The Love That Remains, me and Ben, who was our drummer at the time, we made a bunch of samples from the kit so that we could keep incorporating those sounds across the board of the album. It's nice to have like cohesive sounds. So this was basically the kick drum, if you can hear it. Actually, let me turn on the master so it's a little bit louder for y'all. This should be, yeah, that'll be louder now. So now you can hear that kick. And if you're on headphones, you have the low pillow, which is like 30 hertz to 100 hertz. And then you also have that mid-range edge. And that'll mean that it'll cut through, you know? So that's the kick drum sound. And from there, I ended up side-chaining that sample. And this basically created the intro. Okay, so that's with the kick. Now from there, I almost immediately, with this slow 4 on the floor, I just love syncopated bass lines so much, especially for a song like this, that I wanted to have this sort of cool, laid back, almost like poolside beach kind of feeling to it. So I knew I wanted a syncopated bass line, and a really cool harmony sort of presented itself against this part, which is a little different, actually. It's a little... Uh-oh. My computer. Check 1, 2. Uh-oh. Whoa. Check 1, 2. All right. Computer freaked out. That was a first. At least it didn't crash. Knock on wood. Okay. So I knew I wanted a syncopated bass line against that harmony. This was interesting because usually I almost always, oh my God, my computer is not happy right now for some reason. Okay. Maybe it's my mouse. Too many programs open. I'm gonna close Spotify. Gonna close Splice. Now you guys get to see a sneak peek at the other part of being a musician, which is nonstop troubleshooting. Okay, back to Pro Tools. So I actually ended up starting with this contact bass. So for those of you that know, Omnisphere. This is a cool program by Spectrasonics. And it's actually, I'll open it up for you. It's a Fender bass sampled very, you know. It's super interesting because it's basically just a super clean bass sample. Again, I usually, 90% of Savoir Adore basses I'll just play because I find it easier. But for some reason with this, I wanted this like super in your face, like almost perfect processed bass sound. So I ended up using this, which I then put a little decapitator on for distortion, a little echo boy to give it a little vibe. And I layered it here. So this is the plucky. And that's the other funny thing, you know, this is all working in MIDI. What's nice about working like this is that I'm able to kind of write some notes in or a part that I wouldn't necessarily be able to play, you know? And I think it created something unique. I knew that I needed to layer it though. So in addition to the plucky thing, here's a smooth sub. And this is from a Nexus patch. Cancel. You can hear this. This is much more like, it's basically just a sine wave with some effects. So this is something I would recommend often is, in order to get a consistent, and I mean there's many ways of going about this, like most production things. In order to get a very consistent, strong bass line, especially in a sparse mix, one really good way of doing this is to layer your bass in a couple ways. So by having, and I usually write in my notes here, this original bass is the edge and it's plucky. This is the smooth sub, sort of. Boom, 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 as you can tell. And you know, I have it sort of EQ'd in a way, like you see on this bright one, I have the low end reached out. So when you combine, that's a hell of a bass sound. Yeah, the irony, it's funny that Steve Aoki shows up here. But I'm using this. This is a very complicated synth with a ton of sounds. I'm using a sine wave, which is, for those of you that know, it's just as basic as you can get of a synthesizer, and that's all I'm using it for, which is just kind of dumb of me to do. But anyway, combined, and then I knew I needed one more sort of like, I wanted like a mid-range sort of more synthetic sound. So I ended up doing one more Nexus patch. And I believe this is just a tweaked, I don't want to touch anything to mess it up. I think it's just a tweaked saw wave, actually, filtered in a cool way. So when you combine all three of these basses, and I'm talking about this for a while because honestly, the bass, you'll hear once I play the whole mix, the bass sound is like 50% of the final product. So yeah, if you can hear that, especially if you have good headphones, you'll see it's a pretty consistent bass sound across the entire spectrum, and it makes it sit and push really in the mix, which, you know, is sometimes very hard to do with just an electric bass performed. So this really became the basis of, especially the intro. So I'll play all that together. This is the sample, which is the full track cut up, filtered, the kick drum, and the bass line. And from there, obviously, I knew time to build up. Again, considering that it's going to be kind of chill poolside thing, I love soft, intimate clap sounds, you know, like the sort of like kind of small things. Often I'll record them in. I believe these were just, these were samples that I had from some real claps. And it's three of them, you know, panned in a, actually, they're all panned pretty straightforward, actually. So here's clap one. Alternating. It's always good to alternate and to change up your samples or else it feels too mechanical. So I'll move them. Yeah, it's two different samples moved around. And then layered with this one. A higher, kind of snappier thing. Both really wide. It's fun to do, you know, you'll notice with a lot of really good remixes, percussion super wide. You know, keep the center of your remix should just be kick drum, bass, vocal. Honestly, if anything else is in the center of your mix, I feel like you're making a big mistake because you're gonna eat up, and that's the focus, that's the meat. You know, it's kick drum, bass line, lead vocal, and you'll see, most everything else is panned or modulated in a way to make it feel wider and stereo. And so this third clap on the second one. So when you combine all that, and I'll just play the beat because this is where the beat ends up, and this is actually the beat for most of the song. You know, pretty straightforward, but it does its trick. Oh, and I forgot Shaker, which I actually was using Stylus for. This is a really cool plugin that basically just takes, I don't actually want to open this though, because it might lose the Shaker sample because it's glitchy. But basically it's two shakers, a left and a right. So I think that's the only one, yeah. And once you put those shakers against the beat, it's a fun, deep, chill groove. And bring that bass line in. So you see, that's basically the foundation of this remix. You know, from that moment, it kind of developed pretty quickly from there. Now, one thing I had a lot of fun with is because, you know, the vocal's really strong. I didn't have to do too much of that, but I wanted to reimagine the chorus. So I actually did a little bit of a reharm, and you know, Leah's vocal, "I'll be your," let's see what range it's in, so I'm not messing it up here.
No one's home. Look me up.
So that's against the whole track.
I'm not the
But yeah, this.
meal for two.
Sorry, double. Let's see where it is.
Gold.
Yeah.
No photograph. Look out.
I wanted to rework the chorus.
I'll be your gold angel.
So that was one thing, a nice little pitch shift thing. But there's this space. I'll be a gold angel if you want me. And then there's this cool space to sort of do something. So I thought it might be cool to make this a little jazzier because it does lend itself to reharm. And so what I did, and again, you'll hear
No
here,
photograph.
the whole verse is pretty straightforward,
Meal for two,
as you can tell.
E for one. This place of worship has come undone. Shadow frame.
Just had some fun delay. I love to throw, vocals to these. This is a dotted eighth note, Memory Man setting on an Echo Boy. If you tune into these, you'll see I have the same tricks that I use over and over again. And most people do, I feel like, to be fair. I knew I wanted the chorus to be different, though. And so I thought it'd be really cool to sort of reharm in it. And I'm sure I'll remember now what I did. But so this is the chorus. And so I ended up bringing in some fun synth sounds. I think I had just gotten the Juno, so I used the Juno on it. Let's see what we got here. I'm just gonna unmute everything except the vocals. Let's talk about the instrumental. So that was a fun reharm because if you listen to the original, this is always fun to do and go back to. This is the original chorus.
In the wall.
Here it is. Nope, and that's not it.
Can't
It's here.
I'll be your gold angel if you want me.
Which works beautifully, but I kind of thought, let's jazz it up a little bit, add a little seventh chord. I wish I remember what chord I played. Let me look at it. It's because I was improvising on these are all real synths, so I actually don't have any of the chords here, but I have the bass notes. Let's see. So you get to this chorus. It's boom, dun, 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 some sort of F. It's like an F diminished chord or something. I'm sure there's someone on this chat who knows harmony better than I do. But I just remember kind of playing these songs, these chords that would sort of lead against the melody better. And it made for a really cool counterpoint because you just heard the original, and then this is with Leah's vocal in the remix.
I'll be your gold angel if you want me. I'll be your gold angel, baby, you want me.
So yeah, I mean, that chorus, once that came together, it was just a matter of making it as kind of funky and groovy as possible. The melody really, it suits having those little breakdowns, which is so nice. This was some sort of sample, I think, from another Stylus thing. I think it's weird that it's cut up. Sometimes this is from 4 years ago now, so I'm not sure exactly, but it worked perfectly in that little space along with the bass line. This is the Juno patch. I wanted it to have sort of a retro, sparkly synth vibe. That's a Juno. And then the Poly 6 adds a little something. Yeah. Again, can't recommend those two synths more. They're unbelievable. And then at the end, I wanted to add even more sparkle. As you can see, sparkly synth, magic art. I wanted to add more to the end of the phrase so that second phrase felt even more special. And that's, as you can see, it's just a really bright, this is a preset that I made called Magic ARP. And then this sparkly synth, yeah. This is the problem with some of these plugins. After a while, they lose their presets. So I think this is PL Beauty Combi on the Nexus, which sounds like this. Really great patch. But yeah, most of it is this Juno really cuts through. Boom,
I'll I'll be your gold angel. If you want me, I'll be your gold angel. Baby, you want me?
Back to the intro. Again, just to show you guys how that original sample really plays as sort of the instrumental hook. This thing right here. So the way to sidechain that is you actually open a compressor like this. Sidechaining basically means that something else is triggering when this compressor turns on. And so when you sidechain against a kick drum, what's so cool is that the kick drum kicks in the compressor and the sound actually ducks down. And that's, you've probably heard the term if you're at all interested in production, but it's what gives you this sort of like modern dance thing of like wah, 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 when things sort of dip down against the track, the kick drum especially. So it sounds like this. As you can see, the sample's dipping every time the kick drum hits, and it's cool because it's functional in two ways. It's a really musical thing because it actually shapes, it shapes the sound of the sample that you're sidechaining. But then it also is really good for mixing because it gives the kick drum much more space. So the kick drum can actually poke through. So I always recommend sidechaining even just a little bit against any pad, any kind of lower mid harmonic information, so that the kick drum can keep kicking through. Get it? So yeah, and to be honest with this, I'm gonna say, with this remix, even compared to some of our original music, this is one of the smallest sessions I've ever worked on. And I think it's just because what ended up working was something more sparse, I didn't want to overload this arrangement because then it would start getting abrasive, and I wanted this to just really work to kind of have that poolside vibe that just like puts you in a, puts you in a magical space. So yeah, once that main vibe was established, once the chorus is established, then it's just a matter of extending ideas, which often in songwriting, it's really not that hard, especially in a sort of like pop sense, because structurally most pop songs are the same. And for a remix too, it's like partially you want to keep the same vibe. You don't want to have too many wacky turns, or else like it kind of loses you kind of lose the strength or the focus of the song itself. Not to say you can't add a lot of magical sparkle to it. So for me, verse and chorus is the same. I added a couple new things to that second verse, which is up here. And then the bridge, there's a really nice portion of the original with this guitar line that goes. So I kind of wanted to just use Minke's original bridge, but just add some more side chains and stuff, and add a little bit of a vibe that fit in. So drum-wise, I kept it the same. And I've got this really good Nexus patch, LFO pad here. So this was the basics of this. Well, actually, first, let me show you. I ended up using the full track. So yeah, usually I don't use a full sample like that, but again, I thought filtered, it just sounded so cool. It's almost like a vinyl sample or something that you lifted. And especially, it's filtered to death and compressed, because otherwise, it's the whole track. It's everything. But filtered, EQ'd, that sounds like a radio sample, which is cool. So I wanted to build on that. Yeah, it's true. Someone on Twitch has said, THC Rain, I find the trick is staying out of your own head, analytical mode, long enough to develop ideas without second-guessing everything. It's true, and I think especially once you're flowing. I don't think there's anything wrong with approaching analytically and really thinking about your decisions before jumping in. But I think it's incredibly dangerous that while you're working, you second-guess everything you do and sort of... You've got to let yourself flow, and that's that balance. I mean, I think that's the tricky thing about, I think, being a producer in general, is you constantly have to sort of you kind of have to move between a purely creative flow and also an analytical flow at times to really think about what you're doing. But yeah, if you get stuck in your own head, I've worked on remixes where I've just, hours and hours, days and days of overworking something, and then all of a sudden I'm listening to it and it's like the mix is terrible. There's too many elements. It lost its original, sort of goal. But yeah, this one, luckily, this was not one of those. It was a very easy creative flow. And so I just based off this bridge, and you can hear here against the kick again. Shaker is still in there. So that LFO pad, though, was really magic for me. As soon as I found that sound. For anyone interested, this is the patch on Nexus. It's built-in patch. Super, super juicy and inspirational. Probably should write a song against that. And then I had that magic ARP sound as a bass sound here, sidechained as well, using, again, you can use any compressor that has this right here, which is called a key input, in order to sidechain. And all you do is you just you select what you want the sidechain to be. In this case, it's bus 1 because that's where my kick drum is being sent. I like the API 2500 for bass stuff just because it compresses a little bit more elegantly, if you could say, than just a regular compressor, and you can really customize the way that it compresses. So yeah, I compressed this bass. So this really had it fattened up. So when you hear this is the whole bridge. And it's pretty straightforward. Again, it's just Leah's guitar playing. It's just that lead line, that bridge sample, drums, bass. Groovy. And there, I wanted to, I'm sort of accenting it's a bit predictable, but it's accenting those bump, 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 which is often in these sort of like mid-tempo dance songs. But I got a really nice pluck sound. Here's a pluck. This is a sample. Sylenth. I've had this synth forever. I actually never used it, and then I pulled it up for this track and fell in love. This synth does the pluck sound, especially modern dance pluck sound, so well. This is a preset 360 called Plingle. Tweaked a little bit, I believe, but it's basically a straightforward pluck that's like this. Super sharp, super vibey, and it just fits in a mix really well because it's that sound. So I think what I ended up doing was layering it with maybe a couple of things. No, the bass comes in, that's what it is. And that's it. It's just that pluck sound. Let's check it out. Yeah, it's like a perfect pluck sound in that setting. Just saw a couple more people tune in. If you're just joining us on Twitch, I'm Paul from Savoir Adore, and we are breaking down a remix we made for Minke, Gold Angel, from a few years back. Every Wednesday we do this here, session breakdown in Pro Tools, talk about the production techniques, songwriting, that kind of stuff. So thanks for being here. And thanks for everyone who's come back and hanging out and enjoying yourself. I'm glad you're here. If you have any questions, again, feel free to drop it in the chat. I got that open over here. Any questions at all? And so basically for this song, once I had the bridge, the last chorus is just a rehashing with some added elements. I wanted the last chorus to feel a little bit bigger, so I ended up doubling up on the pad sounds, as you can see here. Magic. So here, as opposed, the earlier choruses I had that sort of groove breakdown. I figured it would be cool in the last chorus. Just let it keep going so you can hear how that sounds. good question. FizzXDD on Twitch asks, do you give each track their own space in the mix? It's so funny, you just read my mind because I was actually just going to talk about that. Because especially in this one, I felt like it was particularly important because this one really, it came together in a way that was pretty sparse. And so in those cases, you have the opportunity to really make the mix sound big and strong. So I think there's two parts in terms of making your own space in the mix. Number one part, and obviously, this is an answer sometimes on tutorial videos that's like a little bit of a cop-out, but it's arrangement, and you want to pick instruments in a way that complement each other in a mix. So for this mix, for example, and I also, there's own space. There's two ways of thinking about space in a mix. There's kind of like literal left, center, right space, physical space, and then there's EQ, which is like the frequencies in which sounds exist. For example, my voice right now, most of my voice is living between 200 hertz and 5K, 5 kilohertz or 5,000 hertz. And then you kind of sculpt within that range. Now, a kick drum, or a bass drum is going to be a combination of very low lows, like this big kick here. I'm sure I'll just show you guys really quick because it's this EQ does a great job of it. So you can actually see where this kick drum is living. So a kick drum, cooking usually down 30 hertz up to 50 hertz is going to be a peak or so. There's a lot of information around 100 to 150. That's what you call the body of a kick drum. That's what really hits you on a dance floor. Mid-range is usually a little lower, and then there's usually some upper mids, 2K to 5K, that really cut through, okay? So, again, what's going to play nice with that, or rather, the low end wise, you're going to also then have bass. So I really like in most mixes kick drum. This is most of the track. So that's kind of the only low end information I want to have. So for me, I know that at that point, I'm not going to add any other low-end information, no any low pads or stuff like that, or synth bass. Like this is working, and there's an energy, there's a rhythm, more importantly. You want your low end to be clean rhythmically, unless, of course, you want sustain. But for me, it's really just about carving out space through choices, And then, obviously, there is carving out space with EQ and stuff like that as well. But if you listen to this,
I'll be your cold angel. Baby, you want me.
And also, I wouldn't think of it. One mistake I used to make when I was younger is like, I would think that an instrument could only live in a specific frequency. But they complement each other. Every sound, like the reason why I cut out the low end, for example, of this bass. This is my like very plucky, edgy Fender bass sound. So I cut a lot of the low end, as you can see. Anything under 50, I drop 3 dB at 100 hertz. So, and this for me is to blend the other bass sounds. So, yeah, again, I know it's a hard thing to answer in a short sense, but I think it's that combination of like kick drum and bass living in low end. So much of it is about arrangement. Leah's vocal I filtered extra, so her vocal really lives just in that range between. Here's the EQs I have on her vocals. Oh, please don't crash, computer. Did I go too fast for you? This beach ball of death. The beach ball of death. Okay, we're alive. So if you look at the EQs I have on Leah's vocal, actually it's pretty subtle, but I am cutting everything below 100, and there was already a filter on it. So her vocal is obviously living, in a higher range. It just worked out. If you pick instruments, that's important to remember. Any instrument you pull up, it's already going to have a sound, So like this Poly 6, actually it's a bad example because that's pretty full sounding. But think about each instrument's role in a space as well. And I mentioned this earlier, but the only things that are in the center of this mix are really the kick drum and the bass. Leah's vocal is actually a little bit wider, maybe about 30% left and right. And then all the claps I have super wide because I printed them that way So you can listen here, you know. Claps are way out left and right, that way. And this gives you a lot of space for Leah's vocal and for the other elements. So again, yes, I do, and it's about arrangement, frequency, but also think about your panning. It's huge, especially I feel like in like dance music. Panning is really, really huge. Anyway, that was a long answer, but THC Rain asks, cool stream, glad to stop by. Quick question, I've been asking other producers using Pro Tools for electronic work. Yeah. Do you find Pro Tools has any advantages or disadvantages for your workflow style over other DAWs, or is it simply a question of familiarity? It's an interesting question, and like, 15 years ago, most people used Pro Tools, and then they started using Logic a lot. Now, obviously, more and more people use Ableton. They use Studio One. Like Studio One, I've heard great things about, and I've worked on it a little bit. Splice offers this amazing like rent-to-own capability, so you can, start working in a DAW for like $10 a month or something crazy. I think first and foremost, it's definitely about familiarity. The one thing I will say about Pro Tools, I find it to be the easiest to navigate and the most intuitive from a visual sense. And I don't work in MIDI that much. As you can see, like most of my drums are actually audio samples. As I would say 50% of this track going up and down is about audio. I think Pro Tools just handles audio, and especially editing of audio, much better than any other program. Because that's what it's really about. Pro Tools was invented before soft synths were really a thing. It was really just an arrangement tool and a sequencer, if you will. But I mean, not a sequencer, sorry, an arrangement tool for editing audio clips. So for me, I think if you're someone who works with a lot of audio, Pro Tools is really fantastic. Where it lacks, unfortunately, is like, you pull up a plugin, any plugin, and you're not going to have the ability to like automate a filter, whereas Logic automatically lets you do that. So you have to actually go in. If you want to automate something, you have to go into the plugin, go to automation, add the automation, and then it's available here. So it's like 4 or 5 more steps. But again, I absolutely love Pro Tools. I've worked in Logic for years. I've worked in Ableton. All of our live sets, we have some track elements and effects running through Ableton. Ableton is an incredibly powerful program, and it's really creative. But I think for this kind of work, when you're arranging a lot of audio, Pro Tools just can't be beat. It's very simple. And the summing architecture of the audio itself, there's a reason why it's still considered one of the industry standards. It sounds good, The way that it sums audio sounds better than some other programs. So yeah, I'm a big Pro Tools fan. The only other main downside is that it is much, much too expensive. And I think, Avid is an amazing company in terms of technology, but I think they've really pushed their costs too high, and it's a little bit alienating, I think, to people who can't afford, now it's like $80 a month. It's absurd. But anyway, I could talk about that for an hour, because I think you should be able to produce music and not have to be, not that it's like expensive, but that's a lot of money to drop, especially if you're someone who's just getting into it. I think it's absurd. Anyway. I digress. Thanks for the questions, though. Any others, please, drop in there, drop in the chat. Let me know. I see some people tuning in now more on YouTube. Hello, guys. Someone gave me a little Dreamers and a heart. I do love Dreamers. If you love Dreamers, check out our session breakdown of Dreamers, which should be all over these places. Well, I'll wrap this one up pretty quick because, again, it's a pretty small session by comparison, but I thought it would be fun to show you guys sort of the process of the remix. And, just to give you a little insight. Okay, well, actually, one more thing. The very ending of the song, I wanted to add some arpeggiators. And for that, I always have a lot of fun. So I combined, that pluck arp that I showed you guys, the silenth. So I knew I wanted to sort of combine that with some other things. So I've shown you guys my Prophet 08 in the past, but I'll show it to you again here. This is such a fantastic synth, and this is from I think they started coming out about 10 years ago, but it's Dave Smith's Prophet 08, which obviously the original Prophets were released a long time ago. But it's an incredible analog synthesizer, and really, it combines quality analog sound with modern capabilities. And I was able to get these really great. I'll just play you guys the original sounds, which are these two right here for that same arpeggiator. And it's nice. I always like double tracking arps like that because you'll get tiny variations, because it is analog. It's not perfect. Tiny variations that actually create a warping sort of thing. So when you combine all three. But I wanted a little bit more magic there. So I added Echo Boy and Valhalla Ubermod, which every week I will talk about this plugin for as long as possible. I think it's just the best. It's $50. Endless modulation capabilities, vibrato, delay, deep stuff, weird warping. There's a drive function. You can make it sound like a cassette. So when you add that, this is before and after. Ooh-wee. That just takes it to space. And the same thing for the second track. So when you add them together, that's magic. So I wanted that ARP to go over the last chorus, and this is what it sounds like in the context. So yeah, that was the ending, and it was basically, it's pretty straightforward in terms of those structural things, but it just worked, I think, all together. And again, it's always easier when you work with a good song, because Leah's vocal, the top line melody on this is just, it's really, really easy for that to carry anything else, any sort of interest on the top end. So that was it, and just to let you know, what's interesting about remixing too is you can do all this work and finish it, and then you send it off to a record label or an artist or their management. And sometimes they just don't like it. Or sometimes they have a lot of thoughts and lots of editing. And you sort of have to play that balance of, in the end, they are technically like a client. So you have to, you are being paid or not paid sometimes to do something, for them. You're being commissioned to create music. So, but it's a balance because you also want to stick to your, you got to sort of stick up for yourself and stick to something you believe in. This was easy because I think, it came together in a really solid way. I'm, friends with the management. We share a manager. So the last thing we did was we just bumped up the tempo, and I ended up tweaking the bass a little bit on this. I mean, I kind of went down a rabbit hole on the mastering plugins. Oh, that's something I'll talk about real quick. And, again, not for too long, but this is without the mastering. And it's nothing crazy, but I do, usually about 50 or 60% through a mix. I usually start with just an L2 on so that things are louder. I'll start adding some bus compression to give it some glue. And what I mean by bus compression, bus is where all the audio tracks combine. So where everything combines, you then add more processing to sort of create a little bit of a glue. On vintage consoles, you would usually have a bus compressor that you would turn on usually for monitoring back or for just adding that final step of glue that squeezes things together. There's a nice circuitry to it that usually adds a little bit of saturation, sometimes a little bit of color or noise. In this sense, I really like to use the API 2500 plugin. So I'll just run you through this really quick. Basically this compresses a little bit. I'm probably only doing like, And these are the settings I usually like to use, which is why it says hammer bus comp. Never more than 2 or 3 dB, like really more like 1 or 2 dB of gain reduction, meaning you're not hitting the compressor very hard. You just want to squeeze it a little bit. And I always find, and I've learned this trick from many other mixers and friends, like use more than one compressor, but each compressor should only be doing something a little like minor. So this is 1 or 2 dB gain compression. I like adding in the SSL comp as well because there's a little bit more color there, and I have the analog switch in. This is a SSL emulator, And as you can see, same thing. This is actually catching. I'm probably hitting this a little too hard, but I kind of wanted to go for that like smashed, gluey remix. And since the transients, since those drums are really poking through, you can slam it a little bit harder. But see, I have a slower attack, so it allows that to come through. Then I'm doing a little bit of tweaking EQ. I realized I needed to just bump up those upper mids and some highs and drop a little bit of this, Usually when I'm done and I'm happy, I'll pull up an EQ and I'll do, here, I just don't want to mess it up, but I'll do this. I'll find kind of like treble frequencies, 1 or 2, whatever seems to be really like either cluttering up a mix or making things feel muddy. So often it's in the lower mids. So I found, that weird frequency, and I just dropped it a little bit. So I think I just had it like, I forgot already, but 2.4 dB. Then I don't often use this plugin, but since I really wanted to squash and make this feel fat, I use this multi-band processor called C4, made by Waves, which is, honestly one of the older and more commonly used plugins for a long time. It's not super modern, but it really does a trick. And the way that it works is that you can actually separate where it compresses band to band. So you can actually hear it here really. Most of you won't be able to hear this if you're not on headphones, but this is just the low end. Just everything below 128. Ooh, it's like really just all sub frequencies. And if you want to hear this is the mid range. This is the upper mid range. Actually, this is more like high highs, 4 to 8K, or highs, I mean. And then sizzly high highs, which again, this is a quick little ear exam for everyone out there. If you don't hear this, get your ears checked. But basically the way the C4 works is it's a smart compressor. It only compresses frequencies when those specific frequencies go too far. But it's a really great way of evening out a mix, because you'll find if you're trying to master a track and the mix engineer or yourself, if the bass is too loud, it's really hard to then master the track to be consistently loud and for the perception of it to be loud. So often I'll use a multi-band compressor on a track like this to just squeeze all the frequencies whenever they pop out. And it creates a more consistent mix. Now, you don't want to go overboard with this either, or you lose a lot of energy. So for me, as you can tell here, I'm not compressing more than like 4, again, like maybe 4 or 5 at the most dB of gain reduction, meaning the compressor is only lowering the volume 4 or 5 dB. But again, in all these little steps incrementally, it adds up to something. You're giving the track some glue, you're giving it a little bit of color, and through the compressor opening and closing, you're actually accenting the grooves and pumping it a little bit more. So after that, I just did a final step of limiting. I love Minke DSP processing. One more EQ, just a little bit more of the carving out of the low end. Tiny, again, this is all minor stuff on the last little bit. 1 dB here, 2 dBs here, and then an L2 waves, which is, again, pretty industry standard. I just had this lower so that it wouldn't distort the stream, but normally you bring this back up to like 0.1 or 1. I don't know. I'm not that scientific about it, so I'm probably doing something wrong, but that's that, And again, you can hear without the mastering. And then with the mastering, obviously much louder. But what's cool about that mastering chain is it actually it makes the track obviously much louder, but also more consistent, more detailed, and it feels more complete because you've glued everything together a little bit. And that's, that's honestly the sort of key to mastering. And this is, sort of a hybrid approach, which I think a lot of remixers and a lot of producers nowadays do, which is you're essentially, you are gluing the track, you're mastering the track in some ways while you're also producing it. And it's, you know, it's a debate because a lot of producers, you know, don't mix. So they would not put this whole chain on. They would maybe, you know, just put on 1 or 2 compressors to add a little bit of glue. But I knew exactly what I was going for. And if you're a sort of one-man or a one-person project, especially you're going to deliver a final master, you got to do it all on your own. And I think, you know, that's what remixers are going to do. Even if your budget, you know, I think an average budget for a remixer in indie dance is going to be like $500 to $1,000. If you're a bigger name, maybe $2,000, $3,000. You know, it's good money. You know, you put in work, but like you don't have a budget to then hire another mixing engineer, hire a mastering engineer, or else you end up making $100 for 4 days of work, which is not great. You know, or who knows? Again, it ain't about the money, but you do have to think about it sometimes. But yeah, that's basically the entire process. So at the end, it was mastered. It went out on Spotify, and thankfully, this one had some really good playlisting. It picked up, and it ended up being one of our more. It's partially why I wanted to talk about it. This track was more popular than most of our album at the time because it just connected on a bunch of playlists and with Minke's fans as well as ours. So yeah, that's about it. And yeah, someone asked. It's all completely mixed and mastered in the box. That's why I think, you know, I had to sort of add a little bit of color on the end there. But that is the Gold Angel remix, top to bottom. I will put on the final product one more time so you guys could hear it. I'll put that on Spotify because that, again, in case I mess something up while teaching this tutorial. But that's pretty much it. I'll let that go. Thanks again for tuning in, for all of you on Twitch, on Facebook, and on YouTube. And if you are just tuning in for the first time, give us a follow. You can also, what's it called? Give us a follow, or you can also subscribe, and you can see our full schedule for the week. Saturday nights, we do our dance party, which we are going to be doing this weekend. And then Sundays, we do like a chill set. Actually, I'm going to do something a little different this Sunday and do a little bit of a ambient improv, but I'll talk about that more later. But yeah, please, you know, keep in touch, keep follow. I'm going to hang out for a little bit longer and answer any other questions. So I'm just going to play the final product one more time. Oh, you could all see what I've been listening to, guys. Real quick. And here it is, the final version of the Savoir Adore remix right here. Actually, I'll play it down here. But yeah, I'm hanging out. Thanks again for tuning in. I'm Paul from Savoir Adore. Also, if you're in any of these, you'll see in the bio up front, if you want to listen to the track or listen to any of our music, give us a follow on Spotify. We've got lots of music out there now, remixes as well as original albums. And I will answer some of these questions. I'll listen to this. We'll play the song first, and then I'll answer some of these. And thanks again. Oh, the volume's down.
All dressed up, nowhere to go. TV's on, no one's home. Look me up, I'm not there. Leave a message so you can cuts like glass. Heal my earth, get here fast. I'll be your gold angel if you want me. I'll be your gold angel, baby, you want me.
I'll lower it a little bit. So that's the final, as the bridge, that is the final product. Let's leave it playing in the background a little bit. The final remix, once it's out on Spotify. Again, I think I put the link up above in the comments caption section, but please add it to your playlist, check it out, check out the rest of our music. I had one more question I wanted to answer. THC Rain asked, thoughts on using rack processing going into the DAW versus piping audio back out to the rack versus staying in the box. It's all interesting stuff, and I think for many people starting, and then also people with a hybrid studio where they have analog synthesizers and EQs and compressors that are, boxes themselves. I mean, I'll just show you guys a little bit. It's always interesting, because I feel like I started, and on my generation, I turned 35 this year. I am a generation of engineers, a generation of producers, really, that kind of lived between two worlds. I started doing like cassette 4-track demos when I was 14 or 15 years old, but then quickly, I remember when I was 18 years old, like the M box for Pro Tools was introduced, and all of a sudden everyone had an M box. And then I was at NYU in college, and everyone, was recording with M boxes and like one little microphone in their dorm rooms on a terrible old laptop. And I remember it crashing every time there was more than like 8 or 9 tracks. So it's like there's so many ways of going about it that it's almost overwhelming. But I think it's about, I personally, to answer your question, I think all of these workflows are great and work. And I think if anything, I would always suggest jumping between, or at least incorporating different workflows at different times in your career, because if you get too comfortable with one specific workflow or one specific set of techniques, you're going to start doing things the same way without actually listening. And that's something, several people have recommended to me, and I like it. I think that goes for songwriting. I think it goes for producing. It goes for mixing. As soon as you incorporate some new challenges, you'll find that you're actually listening instead of just doing things by habit. Because, I definitely, sometimes I'll open up sessions and add an L2, and I'm like, why am I adding this plugin without even listening to the track first? It's like adding salt to a meal before tasting it. It doesn't make any sense. So for me, yeah, exactly. Yeah, she said I started session playing in all analog and then moved to digital. It's been interesting. It's interesting to jump between those two worlds. I think it's fun to just embrace it and to also play with it, have fun, experiment with it. Like something for me I like to do is I'll use soft synths, but then sometimes I set up the Juno specifically so that I'm only gonna write on the Juno, and it really helps me, And again, but just specifically when it comes to mixing, I used to use a Dangerous Audio summing box, and it was really cool, and it made things sound a certain way, and it changed your workflow. But I also ended up, unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but in terms of my mixing, I was touring enough where I was working on my laptop and then working in the studio and then working on my laptop and trying to develop ideas. It just kind of made it impossible for using the same computer and the same workflow. But I really think all those workflows work well. I think if you have a great sounding rack, like a really good compressor out of the box or really good EQ, totally track with a little bit of it on always, because it's going to add something, and it also forces you to make decisions early. And the more decisions you make early, I always feel like are it's helpful. It's really helpful, and you're going to get the best product. So yeah, I think it all makes sense. And then also, I would say I like taking audio and going out of the box only if it's effects, just because of the way I work. Like I love I'll send stuff to my delay pedals all the time and then reincorporate it. And this is because I like to have some physical control. And I talked about that in one of our tutorials or breakdowns for Beating Hearts, because I use that a ton. So I think it's really fun to go out of the box put some effects on things and then print them back into the box. But yeah, again, for the most part, you know, I'll use that stuff on the way in, but then I stay in the program digitally for the completion of the whole process. And it's just, it works for me, you know. It's about sort of like what you're comfortable with, but then also throw in a little challenge here and there just to help you out. But again, that's a long answer. Anyway, guys, thanks so much for tuning in. Thanks for hanging around. I hope you enjoyed this little breakdown, learned something maybe. Any thoughts or questions or, you know, songs particularly you want us to do or break down? We're going to keep changing these up a little bit. I think next week I'll do another one with Lauren, and then maybe we'll even do like an actual live writing session because we've been wanting to do that as well. But yeah, I'm Paul from Savoir Adore. In case you don't listen to our music, please check it out on Spotify. Give us a follow here. We're also on Instagram, of course, just at Savoir Adore. And thanks again for tuning in. See you Saturday night, dance party, 8 o'clock. Hope everyone is doing well out there. All right. Signing off. See you next time.